Well, John, first let's do this. Give me, are you in the home research facility there?
I am in the home research facility, working out of the home office today.
What's been going on at the university there? How have they been dealing with this virus?
Well, I think we've done, I think it's been amazingly consistent how universities have dealt with this. We pretty much have closed all in-person classes, sent students home, and have all non-essential folks working from home. And at a university, the definition of essential is pretty narrow. I mean, we're down to mainly people who are feeding animals or watering crops, plants in the greenhouse and doing those kind of things to keep research trial kind of stuff going. But those of us who teach and do administration and do research are pretty much all working from home.
But you still have to monitor what's going on. And one of the things I would imagine you've noticed, like anybody else, is this, and you see it from your professor's eyes of, let's talk about distribution of food. What have you found uh, when it comes to trying to get our food from the farm to the plant to the grocery store?
So there's been a lot of concern, I think, developing about supply chain disruptions, and that makes sense. I mean, one of the first things that we saw when we really got into the middle of the COVID-19 response, one of the most obvious things we saw was shortages in grocery stores, and honestly, that's something that really freaks Americans out because we are not used to that, right? We're used to going in a grocery store and seeing 25 different kinds of ketchup on the shelves and everything full. And when we go in and we see the bread aisle half empty or three quarters empty, and the meat case is almost empty, and the toilet paper aisle completely empty, we panic a little bit. And so supply chain disruptions have really been front and center on everybody's mind because of that experience. And really what we're seeing is we don't have what I would call honest shortages of really anything in this country, certainly not of food. But we have had a major shift in how we consume food and where we consume food, and it's taken the supply chain a while to catch up on that. And the primary issue there is that, before COVID-19, typically we would get, numbers vary, but say from 40 to 50% of our food would be consumed away from home. Restaurants, food service, institutional kind of outlets. Now nearly all of it's being consumed at home, and we're buying it at the grocery store. And our processing plants and our retail outlets and really every part of the supply chain has had to adjust to try to shift that production, to try to optimize away from that, 40 to 50% being in restaurants to now all of it going through the grocery store. And that's created some bottlenecks. And so to the extent that we see shelves that are a little light, that's primarily what's going on. Not a real shortage, but a disruption in product flow.
And time of year as well, because we were getting close to the end of the school year.
Yes,
Let's talk dairy for a moment.
right.
We're used to putting all those cardboard containers in the schools. We got it now flipped and put everything into gallons or bags or something, or something that's not going to a restaurant. So that's just one small thing, and that's happening all across the food chain.
That's happening everywhere, and that's happening across lots and lots of different product lines. And I think a lot of things we didn't think about. And milk's a fantastic example. Nobody buys half pint cartons to drink at home, but that's what our school systems run on. And how many millions of gallons were processed and packaged in those half pint containers that nobody needs anymore. And so that's a major change. You see the same thing with cheese. When we buy cheese at home, we buy it in an 8 ounce or 16 ounce bag of pre-shredded cheese, or maybe if you're if you're really ambitious, you buy a 1 pound block. Nobody buys 40-pound blocks, but food service does all the time. And so we've got plants that are set up to fill that need, and overnight that need disappeared. That's a big disruption.
Let's talk the meat industry. You have a couple of big companies in your backyard there. What happens if somebody gets sick? Just this week, Columbus Junction, Iowa, a Tyson Fresh
Yep.
Meats plant closing down because of 24 people infected with COVID-19. What happens if that hits a bigger plant?
So that's the disruption that I think we're really concerned about. These logistical challenges of shifting from food service to grocery stores we're managing that. I think we know what needs to be done there. The real fear, I think the real challenge is what happens when we have to shut down a major processing plant because of COVID-19. There have been a few of these around the country. You mentioned Columbus Junction, that's a pork processing plant. JBS closed a calcio plant in suburban Philadelphia, Souderton, Pennsylvania, because of COVID-19 cases. There's been a couple of poultry plants that have had short-term shutdowns around the country. I believe there was a Purdue plant over on the Eastern Shore that closed for a couple of days. Not a major shutdown yet. But this is the big concern: is what happens if we have an outbreak in a plant among workers, or workers are afraid and just absenteeism eats you up and you can't run the plant. I mean, what happens when a major processing plant shuts down? So far, I think the companies have managed very well. The Columbus Junction plant's a case in point. I don't know that we're going to see that show up in production numbers, because Tyson, I think, has done a pretty good job of routing that production to other plants. If this plant's shut down, maybe I can add another. Maybe I can put a Saturday shift on in a couple of other plants and move that production. I can do some overtime and we can make it work. That's what we're seeing so far. If those shutdowns become more widespread, I think that's the concern, that at least on a regional level could really create some supply chain disruptions. And keep in mind, when a processing plant goes down, if a processing plant goes down, that disruption is going to go both directions in the supply chain, right? It's going to go back upstream to farms, and it's going to affect the flow of livestock and the handling of livestock and the cash flow of operations in a massive way. It's going to go downstream to consumers, and at least on a regional level, maybe affect availability in retail outlets. And so the processors are kind of at a key point in our supply chains, and we're watching that really closely.
I want to go on the downside. Kind of, you just mentioned the grocery stores. What happens if people get sick in grocery stores? What happens if the grocery store has to, I'm not saying close, but they've got all of a sudden find workers? Yes, we have a high unemployment rate in a quick sense, but getting people in and trained, maybe somebody doesn't want to work in there because of a health concern, not just because they're sick.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a concern. I think we saw some of that surface this week. Again, I think the companies are doing a pretty good job of managing that. We've seen, HEB got a lot of attention. It's a major grocery chain in Texas, for raising pay for their workers to make sure that they continue to show up to work. I think there are a lot of those kind of things going on. A lot of companies are trying to do everything they can to source personal protective equipment for workers in grocery stores, face masks and whatnot. And that's pretty hard to find, because obviously the medical sector is a higher priority for that kind of thing. But I do think over the last week or so, we've started to see more aggressive attempts to manage exactly what you're talking about, to avoid a situation where workers in the grocery store either get sick and can't come to work, or don't feel safe and so don't come to work. Walmart obviously is big in my neck of the woods. They are managing, they're limiting the number of people in all of their stores to something like 5 people per 1,000 square feet of floor space, to reduce the density of people in the store. And again, that's to make customers feel comfortable. But I think there's also a worker protection aspect of that they're very cognizant of, that this is making the workers feel like, okay, this is a safe enough environment. I can do this. I can come to work. I can be productive, and I can not have to worry about my health, because we're doing things actively to manage this. And I think, again, ensuring that product flow and that continuity of business is a major part of those efforts.
Let's move ahead 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. We've done all this work to get everything switched to the grocery store. And we've heard it. The thought is on commodities. Once we get out of this, it's going to spring and go forward. We're going to have an itch to get outside. What's going to happen to the supply chain then when this gets on the other end of it?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, will we get kind of whipsawed the other way, where we need to suddenly move a lot of stuff back to food service optimization away from grocery store optimization? I think some of that could happen. I think some of that is probably inevitable. I think that'll probably be a little easier to manage, because I think that'll probably be staged in gradually a little more than the transition initially was. And so I think it'll be manageable in a way that maybe this first step wasn't, or was more difficult. But that will have its own implications. I think you're right. I mean, we don't just turn the switch back to, okay, now we're producing 40-pound blocks of cheddar again, or we're back to half pint cartons of milk. There will be some adjustments, and some of these adjustments affect production. This is not all just something that happens at the processing level. I was listening to an investor call that one of the major poultry companies did earlier this week. And one of the things they talked about was how they've shifted production from large birds, which are primarily a food service product, to smaller birds, which is what they use for their tray pack operations that goes through retail outlets. And so if you think about that, changing actually the size of the bird that you're producing affects a lot of operations. I mean, it affects your growers on the farm. It affects the timing of your hatchery operations. It affects your feed mill operations and how you manage that logistically. So really, every aspect of these production systems can be affected by this change that we're talking about. And I think the typical consumer really has very little awareness of that.
And we just don't know so many parts of this right now, but we're just trying to, I guess, keep that as even flow as possible.
We are, and I would say one thing I would say that I think we all need to take note of is, given how quickly this disruption developed, I really do feel like our system has been very resilient. The adjustments that have been made by retailers, by processors, adjustments that affect everything down to the farm level. To the typical consumer, I think honestly, it's been a fairly easy transition overall when you think about it. I mean, I have not personally gone into a grocery store and seen completely empty shelves of anything except toilet paper. The meat cases are depleted compared to what I normally see, and the bread rack is a little light, and the bottled water is maybe I don't have as many brands to choose from, but I haven't seen completely empty shelves yet in the grocery stores that I've been in, and I've actually been in several, because for me this is like research for me, right? Like I have to keep up with this stuff. So I've actually been really impressed that as quick as this hit happened and as major as it was, our system really has managed it very well overall.
I heard another outlet talk about, these two economists were saying that this is really all they're going to study for the rest of their lives, is what we're going through right now. Do you feel that same way, John?
I think that's probably true. I mean, there will be aspects of this problem that we can pour over for years. And, this is something that we've talked about. I mean, one of the things that, we'll be talking about the economic impact of this event. This is kind of a natural experiment in a lot of ways. And we're going to be talking about the economic impact of this event on various aspects of our economy, not just agriculture, for many, many years. I mean, in some cases, it'll be months and maybe even a year or two before we have absolutely complete data on what these impacts have been. So yeah, this will be one of these events that in certain streams of data, working in agriculture, there are certain things I can look back in the data and pick out a year and say, yeah, I know what that was. The PIC program from 1983, it goes way back. That's a good example. You look at what was weird about 1983. Oh yeah, that was the PIC program year. We'll be looking back at 2020, 25 years from now, we'll say, oh yeah, that was the COVID-19 year.
Yeah. Let's hope it's just 1 year, or not even a
Let's
full
hope.
year.
Absolutely.
All right. That's John D. Anderson, professor and chair of the Department of Agricultural Economics at the University of Arkansas. John, thank you.
Paul, thanks for having me.